horrible year for dark and miserable stories we've had when it comes to the game industry. Fortunately, surely that's all over with now. There's going to be no more talk of disparity, mistreatment of marginalised workers, none of that stuff. After all, the big three have come out and condemned Activision, or at least had internal emails leaked so that they don't have to come out and officially make a statement that could piss off any shareholders or undermine any marketing deals in the works. Being so shocked and appalled and disappointed in Activision Blizzard, we can be safe in the knowledge that Nintendo, Microsoft, and of course Sony have nothing to worry about, have done nothing wrong. In recent years, abuse in the game industry has been put under a long overdue spotlight. For a long time, the subject of crunch and overworking employees to the point of burnout has become a hot topic, going from an accepted part of the business to a rightly scrutinised and controversial practice, especially in light of overwhelming evidence that crunch culture is an inherently flawed idea and a complete failure of company leadership. If only that were the most of the industry's abuses and not the least. Stepping up from the base level of corporate coercion, we have stories revolving around studios such as Rockstar and Riot, companies steeped in a boys club culture where women, people of colour and the similarly marginalised don't get to advance and are treated with contempt. Then there's Quantic Dream, an ego-fueled breeding ground for hate speech, unprofessional conduct, harassment and bullying. Then, of course, we have the two biggest and most egregious examples of company-wide abuse, Ubisoft and Activision Blizzard. Reading the full list of charges levelled at these companies is sickening, and I won't go over them again, but suffice to say it involves mistreatment and abuse of most kinds, including bigotry, humiliation, and physical and sexual assault. At these two companies in particular, the rot is set deep, as leadership condones and often partakes in said abuse. Ubisoft has been noted to move known abusers around the corporate ladder like the Catholic Church did with its own rapists, while Activision's list of crimes is currently being litigated in court by the state of California after an investigation uncovered a litany of awful, truly reprehensible behaviour. But hey, enough about that boring shit. Let's talk about Call of Duty Vanguard and Far Cry 6, am I right? Am I right, gamers? That's what you care about, that's all you fucking care about. Let's just stick to the games, enough of the politics. Let's just enjoy our corporate media in a pure bubble of ignorance that solely benefits abusers, am I fucking right? I've made no secret of my complete and utter disappointment in games media and its half-assed commitment to covering abuse in the game industry. When the allegations come out, they all report on them, make a big deal of them while the story is still hot and juicy. No matter how fucking disgusting, how vile, how downright criminal the abuse is, however, they won't stop promoting the company's games. They won't actually make any sort of meaningful stand. See, there's a pattern emerging in games journalism, one that started with Ubisoft and, as myself and others predicted, has been repeated with Activision. See, when the allegations are hot and fresh and juicy goss, you can't move for stories about it. However, when the reviews come out, when the actual games are on store shelves, so few games journalists actually want to mention the allegations. The reviews come out and there's nary a fucking mention of them. With the Activision allegations becoming such a huge media circus, they've gotten a lot more mentions in reviews of Call of Duty Vanguard, but the same cannot be said for Riot Games, for Quantic Dream, for Ubisoft, and all of the other game companies whose abuses have been largely forgotten in the media. I made a lot of noise last year when Assassin's Creed Valhalla and all of the other Ubisoft games still got primo coverage, even as it became clear that systematically Ubisoft was one of the most abusive companies in the industry, possibly still the most. Quite why Ubisoft has always gotten this special fucking treatment in games media, I'll never know. But we can't forget that it protects sex abusers. It still does. CEO Yves Guillemot has done nothing to address concerns within the company. It is still moving abusers around, and it's still getting all of the coverage in the world for its products. Quite frankly, why these monstrous companies are still able to interface with these outlets, why these outlets are still accepting review copies from them, is beyond me. Well, it's not, I'm exaggerating for effect. We'll actually talk about why they do it. I mean, it's all just traffic, isn't it? But however way you slice it, it's an actual deal with the fucking devil. You especially notice the ignorance of these allegations with some of the bigger publications, some of the more mainstream ones, IGN, GameSpot. They don't like mentioning the horrors of these publishers when they want to talk about Call of Duty or Far Cry. The IGN review of Vanguard has a link to an overview of the lawsuit at the end, but that's about it. I've gone over multiple reviews for Far Cry 6 and Call of Duty Vanguard, and despite the fact these games publishers have continually failed to address their allegations and have so far avoided any meaningful consequences, a lot of current coverage of their titles doesn't actually say one fucking thing about it. This is more notable with Call of Duty Vanguard coverage that came out before Bobby Kotick was implicated in more recent allegations, the ones where it became clear he knew about the abuse for years and actively engaged in it. Before then, the media was starting to conveniently forget the allegations. To their credit, Kotaku and Polygon have been a lot better in this regard, but so many other reputable games outlets separate coverage of the games from coverage of the horrible companies making them. And we see this with other games from other companies. Quantic Dream, stories about it working on that fucking Star Wars game. Rockstar especially gets a free pass. We see this with BioWare as well. That company has had a culture of crunch so horrible it's traumatized developers. But hey, Dragon Age 4, am I right? I'm not saying don't cover all of these games, but don't ever forget what the companies behind them have done. See, as soon as the games are available, the behaviour of those publishing them are conveniently set aside, not necessarily covered up or buried, but put on hold to focus purely on the engagement of publishing article after fucking article about the next big corporate product. I've been critical of the triple amnesia in games journalism since reviews of last year's repetitive Assassin's Creed guff got uncritically praised, but my condemnations have not been uncontroversial. The most common argument against me is that a game review is no place for these allegations, that they should remain more objective and focus purely on the product, because a game review reviews a game, it doesn't review the companies making and selling and profiting from them. I think this is horseshit. First of all, impartiality is a coward's excuse, often used by publications that want to avoid journalistic responsibility. See, for example, the BBC's recent dropping of support for the UK's largest LGBTQ+ human rights organisation and citing so-called impartiality as the reason it kowtowed to the demands of proven hate groups such as the LGB Alliance. Impartiality is the centrism of journalism. It's an excuse to stand for fucking nothing. Second, shit doesn't happen in a bubble. I think the conditions under which a game is made is absolutely worth mentioning in a review. If I purchase a product knowing it was made with some basic human decency and ethics is absolutely something I want to know as a customer. Fact is, Ubisoft and Activision's games were published under the so-called leadership of fucking monsters, and that is, despite arguments to the contrary, a valuable part of a review, a useful thing for readers to know of and be reminded of. The culture of games production cannot be divorced from the games produced. It's part of how they made their way to store shelves. It's an inherent part of the very morality of financially propping up these companies. Thirdly, we are dealing with organisations that have faced zero consequences for their actions currently, and for publications to not hold them consistently accountable is, in all honesty, a dereliction of journalistic integrity. I cannot overstate how fucking despicable these allegations are. The creatures running these publishers have traumatised hundreds of workers with pretty much every form of abuse under the fucking sun for years, routinely covering them up, protecting the abusers, and punishing the victims who dare to speak out. Truly unforgivable shit that would have any single individual person blacklisted forever. And yet, for their precious access, publications continue to deal with them, to accept products from them, and promote their games in some twisted separation of church and state. Call me extreme if you will, but aside from my gripes about mentions of abuse in reviews, I think certain companies shouldn't have their games fucking reviewed to begin with. If enough outlets had made an actual stand against Ubisoft and refused to review their products last year, things would have been so much harder for the company to ignore, and ignore is what the company is doing right now. It's fucking rubbish. These companies should be fucking haunted by what they've done. They should never be allowed to forget it, never be allowed to to hawk their fucking products and rake in the money that funnels up to the very worst people on the corporate ladder without always being asked to answer for themselves. What they did was staggering in its awfulness, and they should have to face that reality every fucking day. Right now, an organisation of current and former Ubisoft employees operating under the name A Better Ubisoft has pointed out that despite all the fake apologia and promises to do better, Ubisoft hasn't done a single fucking thing to change its culture. Like I said a moment ago, abusers are still being moved around. A third of the workforce still feels unsafe there. Yves Guillemot won't even meet the easiest of demands. The terrible behaviour is continuing. It hasn't magically stopped just because Far Cry fucking 6 released. Also, do please follow the Twitter account for A Better Ubisoft, at A Better Ubisoft, and do the same for A Better ABK, which is an organisation of workers campaigning for the betterment of Activision Blizzard King. But even if you could make an excuse for game reviews, there's no excuse for the endless torrent of tips and tricks articles, cutesy companion pieces, and outright promotional material that inevitably accompanies them. When I say these abuses are forgotten the moment a big game comes out, I don't just mean for the critique of said game, it's all the coverage. Take, for example, when does Call of Duty Vanguard go live? A quote-unquote article that's literally just an advertisement dressed up as public interest. For those of us still completely sickened by Activision's past abuse and ongoing attempts to justify it, seeing everything you need to start playing day one, minute one, is messed up. Hell, even without the abuse, playing into the games industry's manipulative exploitation of FOMO tactics by promoting hype-fueled impulse buys is cause for a side-eye. I did say Polygon and Kotaku have done better in this regard, but this article from Polygon is fucking hell. The article is literally just an advert, and one of such fervent marketing, I'd expect payment from Activision if I wrote something like this. Now, I don't believe game journalists are paid off by publishers, as some people allege. I don't drink that ethics in game journalism Kool-Aid. However, when I read some articles, I do think to myself, golly, if they weren't paid off for this, they're suckers. It's free promotion for which Polygon's reward is yet another mention of COD for the sweet search results. And right here, no mention of the allegations. I guess that gets in the way of the hype. I guess that takes away a bit of the excitement for playing day one, minute one. Then again, Polygon was quite happily publishing half-baked and willfully ignorant defenses of loot boxes before it became objectively uncool to do that shit. I realise it's easy for me to say all this as someone who already burned every bridge they ever had in the games industry and doesn't have anybody to impress or appease. You know what wasn't so easy? Burning those fucking bridges in the first place. What wasn't easy was the escapist refusing to publish a review of mine because it mentioned microtransactions, and I was told reviews should only focus on games, not their business models. What wasn't easy was slowly, piece by piece, watching devs turn on me when it became clear I wasn't gonna forget their bullshit. And I'll tell you what else isn't easy. Watching this sick fucking parade as an abuse survivor who knows full fucking well what it's like to watch abusers get the fuck away with it, which Ubisoft and Activision are currently. Ubisoft parades around with all the swagger of an abuser that's gotten away with it. At worst, even as the allegations continue to mount around him, the billionaire Bobby Kotick has suffered nothing but a performative pay cut that amounts to pocket change, as he's already pocketed over $150 million of company money this year alone, even if he's made to resign. Finally, after insurmountable, stock-crashing abuse, he'll still walk away a billionaire. He'll still walk away likely with his shares intact, like the abusers who were sacrificially jettisoned from Ubisoft have. And if Bobby Kotick walks away, and he'll be allowed to walk away with his worm boy head held high, the board that backed him, Bobby's corrupt con-man pals, will still sit at the head of the shit-stained table. But the removal of Kotick will likely be enough for most people who will think, oh, everything's okay now, I can go back to consuming my products guilt-free. So many in the gaming community can't wait to move on. Enough of them have fucking told me directly, and I'd like to point out, insultingly. I'll stop talking about Ubisoft and Activision. This is why I've stopped watching your videos. This is why everyone stopped watching your videos. Fuck off. Actually unsub if that's too much for you. If continuing to remember what Ubisoft did, what Activision did, is too much for your hardcore hearts to handle. If you've got a problem with my coverage of these companies, especially these companies, fuck right off. Nobody will hold the executives of these companies to lasting account, and this will all wind up forgotten. Preview events continue, interviews continue, reviews continue, unpaid marketing pieces continue. It's nothing but a fucking game in every sense of the word. It absolutely disgusts me how Ubisoft has deftly represented this, how it knew all it had to do was keep its head down, bunker down, drown the abuse allegations in marketing, to the point where it has a frothing army of loyalists in the gaming community who will try and shout down anyone who dares remember what that company's done and does. And Far Cry 6 can come out relatively unchallenged. Just fuck. As mentioned, I've had a lot of shit thrown at me for, well, I guess over a year now, for continuing to cover the situations of abuse within the game industry. A lot of people telling me to shut up about it, that I'm beating a dead horse, that it's all over and done with, it was ages ago, forgive and forget, all of that shit. I should also point out that I've been given a lot of compliments for that work. A lot of people saying, oh, you're shining a light on it, you're not letting them get away with it and all of that. But I do want to point out that I'm just banging a drum. I'm just repeating over and over because I feel we have to just shout and shout and shout. But, you know, original reporting from game journalists, you know, they're not universally bad. It's why I've gone to bat for aspects of the game's press over the years. A lot of this knowledge would not be possible without, you know, folks like Jason Schreier or Cecilia D'Anastasio. I hope I've got that right, I'm so sorry if I haven't, who did the Riot Games report for Kotaku. You know, outlets like Kotaku and Polygon have shone light on these abuses, but of course, as I've said in the past, really the majority of the thanks has to go to the people brave enough to speak out. That doesn't mean that those who have not are not brave. It's incredibly scary, and the way the game industry operates, it's designed to terrify and threaten and coerce people into not coming forward. So those who have done are exceptionally brave, and thank you so much. I've said it before, there's no such thing as too many times to say it. Thank you for coming out and speaking up. Thank you to organisations like A Better ABK and A Better Ubisoft for organising and showing the potential power for organisation. That's what this industry has needed more than anything else, is an organised workforce, a unionised, dare I say it, workforce. So to all of you, thank God for you. Thank you.